Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of 5 Question Friday, where I do my best to answer your questions. Today we've got 5 great topics. First, we're going to take a look at bonds that yield 10%, and are they a good deal or not? Number 2, where should we hold our bond investments if we don't have tax-deferred retirement accounts? We just have Roths and a taxable account. 3, what should we think about if we're considering co-signing a mortgage for a son or daughter? 4, does it ever make sense to pay taxes from a Roth conversion from the IRA rather than the taxable account? And then 5, if we own investment properties, real estate, how should that factor into our overall asset allocation? So great topics. We're going to cover those today. Plus, bonus, I've got a free tool that will help you sort of estimate the cost of long-term care that I stumbled upon that I'll show you at the end of the video. If you'd like to send in questions, just subscribe to the newsletter. It goes out every Sunday morning. It's free. You'll find a link to sign up below this video. And then just hit reply to any email you receive from me. I do eventually read them all, even though if I can't respond to them all. But that's where I get questions for the show. All right, let me put my coffee down. Let's dive right in. Question number 1 comes from a viewer named Tom. He says, in a recent meeting, he was meeting with Fidelity, we reviewed the bond funds, and he didn't mention what bond funds they own, but reviewed the bond funds' relatively modest returns this year, and my Fidelity contact mentioned an alternative option, bonds associated with private investments, private credit, if you will. He said the target return for these private investments is in the 9 to 10% range. He said many large institutions invest in these private offerings. So a great question. I want to nitpick here for a moment. The comment that many large institutions invest in these, I wouldn't credit that for anything. Large institutions invest in a lot of things. A lot of large institutions are horrible investors. Hedge funds go under. University endowments perform poorly. Of course, not all of them do. Some are quite good, and some hedge funds make a truckload of money. But just because a large institution invests a certain way or a wealthy person invests a certain way, that doesn't mean we should, and it doesn't mean it's a good investment. So I don't know why Fidelity made a point of that. Maybe it's got nothing to do with my comment, but I think it's important. I think some people get swayed by, oh, this millionaire invests a certain way. Well, good for them. Now, let's figure out what's best for us. All right. So, does it make sense? Here's the deal. Whenever you see an investment, in this case a bond, that is performing significantly above, in this case, say, treasuries, U.S. government bonds, or even high-grade corporate bonds, you should be alert. You should be wide awake right now and asking, okay, what's the risk? Because you think about it, if let's say it's a corporate bond, if it's a corporation with a solid balance sheet, think Microsoft or Apple, they don't have to pay 9 or 10%. They can get debt at yields close to what treasuries pay. And so you need to understand the risk. Now, if we look at current yields, this is actually from Fidelity's website, and we've got treasuries, corporates, investment grade, below investment grade, municipals. Of course, those have some tax advantages, but you can see what's the highest here, 679 right here. So, and that's for a 30-year below investment grade corporate bond. If Fidelity's got bonds paying 9 to 10% in yield, you're taking on significant risk. I don't know what it is. You need to find out. And the other thing I would add then is they could be great investments. Just because they're risky doesn't make them a poor investment necessarily. But what's the purpose it's going to serve in your portfolio? Because really high yield corporate bonds, for example, can often behave more like stocks than what we think of as bonds. And so that's just a question. I can't answer it for you, of course, but why are we even considering this? I would also point out, this is B&D. I just looked it up in Morningstar. This is a Vanguard Total Bond Market Fund. It's actually not doing bad this year. 6.5%. I don't think that's bad for a bond fund in today's market. And so, again, I don't know what specific bond funds Tom has at Fidelity, but I'm actually quite pleased with the performance of B&D this year. So anyway, that's my take on it. All right, great question, Tom. Appreciate it. Next one comes from Jeff. This is a tricky one. Here we go. If we have to rebalance into bonds, would you recommend buying bonds in a Roth, which decreases the potential for growth over many years, or in the taxable brokerage account, which would incur capital gains because they're going to maybe sell stocks to buy bonds, and potentially reduce our ACA subsidies and even raise our tax bracket? Well, that's a good question, Jeff. Now, A couple of thoughts here, because we've really got two moving parts. We have the rebalancing itself, which if you're going to do in a taxable account, as Jeff mentioned, going to sell stocks, that's going to trigger capital gains. So that's problem one. And the second problem is if you buy the bonds in a brokerage account, then you're going to incur taxes on the interest they pay every single year. So both of those can be problems with ACA subsidies. So now with capital gains, you can say, well, maybe it's a one-time problem. I'll just do it once, maybe, or maybe you have to rebalance again next year. That's the first thing. Now, my initial thought was, well, in terms of investing in bonds, maybe you can use municipal bonds because you don't pay federal income tax. But the problem is that won't help you with ACA subsidies because for qualifying for ACA subsidies, they use modified adjusted gross income. What's modified adjusted gross income? Well, they take your adjusted gross income, which is a line item that appears on the top of your second page of your 1040, at least I believe that's where it is. And what do they add back into it? All that interest you got that you didn't have to report to the federal government, right? That tax-free interest gets added back in. So it's really not going to help you in this case. So here's what I would be thinking. I would be thinking rebalancing. Well, the first question will be, do you really need to rebalance? How far off are you? Is it really necessary that you rebalance now? That's a question, but that's the first thing I would think. The second thing I would think about is, well, maybe I should rebalance inside my Roth. It won't trigger capital gains from selling stocks in a taxable account, which won't increase my income for ACA subsidy purposes. I'm not going to then have to put the money in bond funds in a taxable account that could increase my interest and my income and affect my ACA subsidies. But maybe this could be temporary. At what point, how far from now will you be on Medicare, where you'll no longer have to concern yourself with ACA subsidies? So yeah, generally I want to see stocks in a Roth if I can, but there could be circumstances where it just makes more sense to put some bonds in the Roth. And again, depending on your circumstances, you may get to a point where you don't have to worry about ACA subsidies. Now, you have to worry about other things, right? IRMA with Medicare. So you have to worry about that, and that's very important to keep an eye on. You don't want to trigger income that's going to put you into an IRMA tier that you're trying to avoid, and it could also affect your tax on Social Security. So this may be an ongoing problem or challenge, I guess I should call it, for you. But I would probably do as much as I possibly could not to trigger income to reduce my ACA subsidies. Having said that, at the end of the day, money is money, so you have to sort of factor in how much you're going to lose because you're going to have investments in a Roth that don't grow as much, how long you're going to have to keep them there. Maybe it's just temporary, in which case I'd be much more inclined to go that route with the Roth. But these are all questions that only you can answer, individual circumstances. I wish I could give you sort of just a rule of thumb that we could all follow. I'm afraid not. But those are sort of the things that I would think about. Great question, tough one. All right, number 3. This comes from Lee. What are the factors I should consider before agreeing to be a co-borrower, co-sign on a child's mortgage? So there are a number of questions here. The first is just recognizing what it will do to your financial picture. So this will be debt on your record. It will affect your credit score. If you go to borrow money down the road, it could affect your ability to qualify for a loan potentially, and what your credit score might be. So it's going to have real effects on your own, personal financial situation, and you have to factor that in and make sure you're comfortable with that. The second thing is if your child defaults on the loan, is late on payments. Of course, yes, you ultimately, as a co-signer, you're going to be liable, but it's also could wreck your credit score. And so again, that's something that you need to evaluate, and it's going to depend, on your relationship with your son or daughter, their own financial situation. Why do they need you to co-sign? Do they have? Presumably they have a down payment. That's a different issue. But you're going to have to evaluate how likely you think those possibilities are. I mentioned the down payment because the other thing I would consider is there another way? Maybe if they wait another year, they don't need you as a co-signer. Maybe if they have a little larger down payment, maybe you can help them that way. I don't know, but I would look at alternatives. I don't think that co-signing for a child's mortgage is necessarily a bad thing, but it does add some complexity to your financial picture, and that's particularly true if the child ends up having trouble paying the mortgage. And the other thing, I guess, that I would have to think about is your relationship with them, because in any relationship where money becomes a factor in some way, it can affect that relationship, whether it's two friends going into business. Money can be a big issue. Some of the biggest challenges and fights over money that I have personally seen is when someone passes away and there's a fight over the estate and that sort of thing. Money in relationships can just create a lot of issues, even when both people go in with a great relationship and the best of intentions. It can just happen. And so you need to really think through what that's going to do to your relationship with your son or daughter. And the reality is, you're never going to have a perfect answer. You're never going to know for sure, oh no, nothing's going to go wrong. And, my son or daughter will always call me at least once a week. Yeah, doesn't happen. Anyway, you get the idea. So there's there's financial issues to factor in, there's relationship issues to factor in, and then just looking at possibly alternatives. So great question. All right, number 4. Question for you about doing Roth conversions in retirement. Everyone says pay the taxes out of your after-tax account. But is that only so that more money compounds in the Roth? By the way, yes, that is why. I already have more in my Roth than I think I will ever spend. I have no heirs, and everything goes to charity. Okay. And if I did pay with the after-tax money, I'd have to sell an investment and pay the capital gains on that money. So in this case, does it still matter? And then it's from a viewer named Lauren. Lauren says, I will do whatever you suggest. Oh, please don't say that. Please think for yourself. Hopefully I provide some things to think about, but don't just take my word for it. So I think through this in a number of steps. So there's really kind of 2 reasons why we would normally want to pay the taxes out of a taxable account if we can. One is it results in putting more money in the Roth, which is, as Lauren pointed out, compounds tax-free. It also reduces how much we have in a taxable account, which can be useful because even if it's invested in a tax-efficient way, it's still going to incur, let's say, dividends if it's in a stock index fund every year, so of some amount. And then if you ended up selling it, to maybe you needed to spend it, you're going to pay taxes on the capital gain. So there's sort of 2 benefits to paying the taxes out of a taxable account. But Lauren's situation is unique. So the first thing is, let's just imagine we could just leave it all in the tax deferred account. We're not even going to do a Roth conversion. Let's forget about where to pay the taxes. We're not even going to do a Roth conversion. If a charity inherits that, they don't pay any taxes on it. On a tax deferred account, a traditional IRA, for example, charity doesn't pay any taxes on that. So we want to keep as much money in that tax deferred account as we can. Again, assuming we're not going to spend it all, as Lauren mentioned, she's not even going to spend all of the Roth. We'd love to be able to give tax deferred money to a charity. All right. Now, what's the problem with that plan? Potential problem. Well, required minimum distributions. Depending on how old Lauren is, how long Lauren lives, Lauren's going to be eventually, if not already, being forced to take money out of the traditional retirement account. And not only will that be taxed as ordinary income, but it could affect how much tax Lauren pays on Social Security, could also affect IRMA for Medicare and Part B premiums and Part D for that matter. And so a Roth conversion, even if you plan to give everything you have to charity when you die, Roth conversions can still potentially make sense, particularly if at the conversion time, the tax you're paying is less than you'd pay, say, now or say sometime in the future when your RMDs start. So it can still make sense to do a Roth conversion. Of course, you've got to do the analysis and see what the tax consequences would be. But in Lauren's case, if I were in this situation, I probably would pay the taxes out of the IRA. I think that's at least a reasonable approach. It's going to save me from triggering taxes in my taxable account because I've got to sell investments, at a gain to pay the taxes. If I didn't have cash sitting in a checking or savings account, which it doesn't sound like Lauren does. And like she pointed out, I've already got more money in a Roth than I'm ever going to spend. And so at least, and it's my take that, yeah, that could make some sense. Now, here's the other thing to think about, though. Do you want to give some of the money to charity while you're still alive? Because if you do, then the other thing you need to think about before doing a Roth conversion is qualified charitable distributions. These are distributions you make directly out of your IRA, and up to the limit, I think it's $108,000 either this year or next, but don't quote me on that. You guys can Google it or Chat GPT it or whatever. But that counts towards your RMDs if you're either now or when you get to that age. And so if you're going to give to charity during your lifetime, that might be a way to do it, and you don't have to deal with Roth conversions now. Again, it's at least something to consider as you go through the different possibilities. All right, great question. Number 5, how should I think of a rental property in terms of asset allocation? This comes from Tim, and another great question. And here's my take. I was initially thinking, well, we could just count it as real estate. So you've got stocks, bonds, and alternatives. Real estate would come under alternatives. And you could just say, okay, I want 10% in real estate. But then things start to get tricky. It's like, okay, well, wait a minute. Do I count the total value of my property or just the equity piece? And I thought, well, I would probably just count the equity, meaning if I owned $1 million in real estate and I owed $400,000 in mortgages, I would treat that as $600,000 in real estate. Okay, that's not an insurmountable problem. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. What if I want to increase or decrease that? Because I want to rebalance, for example, and really whatever my asset allocation I came up with, instead of in our hypothetical 600,000, I only needed 500. Well, how do I sell 100,000 of my, 2 or 5 rental properties? I can't really do that. Or if I want to add to it, maybe I need to add 100,000. I can go buy another property, but maybe I'm not in a position to do that. And I think for that reason, trying to force rental properties into like asset allocation percentages kind of breaks down. And I have owned rental properties in the past, and I just more or less didn't do it that way. Instead, what I did, again, I'm not saying this is the best approach, was I thought, well, I've got stocks, bonds, and maybe REITs, possibly. Should I use the rental properties and have them influence my other investments? I'm not going to try to stick my real estate investments into some spreadsheet where I add it to the allocation. But knowing that I've got those rental properties, how should I think about the rest of it sort of separately? Now, one thought is if you have an allocation to REITs, you could maybe reduce it, right? Because you've got these rental properties. I think that's probably a reasonable approach. The only thing I would say is REITs are probably invested in very, very different real estate, particularly if you've got residential rental units. You own some condos or townhomes or single families or maybe apartments. Apartments get closer to what some REITs invest in for sure, but a lot of REITs are in commercial real estate. They're in cell towers. There's mortgage REITs. There's, depending on the REIT, they could be investing in types of property that are very, very different than what you invest in, although maybe not. Maybe you own a lot of commercial real estate. I don't know. But you could use it to sort of maybe reduce your exposure to REITs if you have a separate allocation to REITs. I think the bigger issue is a larger question of risk. And so I know folks like myself. Now I didn't own a lot of properties. I think at one point with a friend I owned 5. That's relatively small time in investing as real estate goes. They were lower end single family homes. Some of you may just have 1 condo or 2 condos. I'm not sure in that scenario I would have it really influence my asset allocation much at all. I would just keep the asset allocation separate to whatever made sense for me. On the other hand, and I have relatives and friends that I know that own millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars in real estate. It's really they think of it, it's their business. And in fact, I'm thinking of one family member. That's as far as I know, but the majority of his wealth is in rentals. I don't know how many units he has, dozens for sure, if not many more. And in that case, my overall concern would be my risk profile. And so if I had that kind of business, I view that as equity. I view that as, that's a business. Yes, you could look at the the cash flow and the rent's kind of like fixed income, but it's really not. I mean, it feels like it is because it comes in regular, like interest payments on a bond. But the reality is you're the owner, you're on the hook. If they don't pay, you don't get paid. Yes, you can sue them. I've been down that path. Good luck. But I really view real estate investments as equity. And so if I had a large portion of my net worth in real estate, the way it would affect me, it would be probably a higher percentage of fixed income inside my portfolio. I would want the security of more cash, short-term cash like T-bills, as well as even maybe intermediate-term bonds. Now, exactly what my asset allocation would be, I don't know. It depends on the numbers and exactly how secure and safe I think my real estate investment portfolio is. Obviously, if you've had it for many, many, many years, you've owned properties for, in some cases, decades. You have a really good feel for how long it takes to get a new tenant. You've got a sense of the risk, and so I would factor all of that in. But I would probably end up with more fixed income in my my IRA or my taxable account than I would otherwise have if I didn't have that real estate investment. So that's how I would think of it. I don't think I would try to shove it into a percentage that I put in a spreadsheet that says, okay, I'm going to have 17% is real estate. You just can't really do that with actual physical real estate. At least not easily. So I probably wouldn't try to go down that route. I would assess my own risk and then set my stock bond allocation based on that risk. So again, 1 or 2 properties probably wouldn't affect it at all. If I've got 80% of my net worth in real estate, I'm probably going to have that rest of that 20%, at least a lot of it, in cash, and more safe investments, realizing that my risk is in my real estate portfolio. That's my take on it. If you have a different take, I'd love to hear it. Leave it in the comments below. All right. Let's take a look at this tool that I found. I think you'll like it. I'm familiar with the site in that I just found it a week or two ago, but I don't know anything really about Care Scout. I actually found them because they put together a study every year on the cost of care. And one of the interesting things in their most recent study is that when you're looking at, like, if you look down here, and I'll just try to make this a little bigger, you see in home care, homemaker services versus a health aid. And this is, I'm assuming, monthly. Yeah, monthly. You'll notice there's not much difference. I would have thought that a health aid would get paid significantly more than just a homemaker services. In their study that they released, they actually made a point of this and said, no, the homemaker services costs are actually going up, and they're sort of neck and neck. But this shows you an estimate of different costs for different types of care. They're doing that. You could do projections. I guess you can also change the percentages, but you can also get specific with location. So I don't know. We'll go to Texas, Houston. Is that Houston? Yeah. You can get very specific with a location, and then you can compare it. So this is Houston and versus the national, but you could put in another, I don't know, New York City. Will that come up? There we go. I'm sure New York's pretty expensive, but you can get an idea, compare them. And I thought that you might find this useful. So I will leave a link to it below the video. Well, there you go. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you have questions, of course, comments, leave them in below the video. I'll be happy to help you out any way I can. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.